Hello?
Why don't you want to talk to me?
Who is this?
You tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Uh-huh.
I only eat popcorn at the movies.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
Female appetite has not come with positive connotations throughout history. According to the Bible, the origin of humanity as we know it began with a woman, Eve, eating an apple, consequently gaining knowledge but also throwing herself into sin. The idea that a woman desiring and consuming is an inherently bad thing is ingrained in Western culture and has been bolstered by pop culture within the horror genre, so much so that the punishment of these women has become a notorious trope known as death by sex. Consistently within the horror genre, women who show desire of any sort or have sex are punished and killed, while those that are virgins and depicted as modest survive. Watching classic horror films left me wondering why it seemed impossible for movie makers to create an interesting horror text without such blatant misogynistic tropes. From this point on, I will be referring to the female appetite. For the purposes of this video, the term female appetite encompasses many things: female desire for sex, female hunger for food, female desire for anything at all, the desire to desire, and the desire to be allowed to desire. Specifically, I'm considering how the female appetite functions within horror texts and how it is treated by the horror-producing community and horror audiences. This consideration includes the desire of real-life women for horror texts that are free from misogynistic tropes and flat female characters. Within the past few decades, the function of female appetite in horror has undergone extreme transformations. While female appetite traditionally served as a way through which women revealed their inner immoral lust in male-oriented horror texts, the increasing space for women producers and consumers of horror means depictions of female appetite in horror has grown to have many varied and entangled meanings. Examples of this can be seen in many contemporary horror texts. Jennifer's Body, Mother, Raw, and Teeth are great examples. For this video, I have chosen to focus on the story 8 Bites from Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado and Ginger Snaps, a 2001 Canadian film. The nature of horror makes it ideal for considering female appetite, the excesses of consumption, and the contradictory feelings we hold with regard to food and hunger. Horror is a genre, in other words, uniquely placed to mirror the contradictory ways we might think about food. There is a lack of restriction to realism within the horror genre that allows for the exploration of appetite in countless radical ways. The fundamental benefit of the horror genre to these women-oriented depictions of appetite is the lack of a need to classify a woman's appetite as good or bad. While women enjoy the aesthetics and entertainment of horror, there are serious qualms about the treatment of women in horror texts and representations of women in classic horror. Older horror texts often degrade their female characters, infantilize them, and undiplomatically terrorize them. Many staple texts in the horror genre heavily feature the male gaze. This forces women in movies to be the bearer of meaning and not the maker of meaning. This is often present alongside the punishment of women that showcase any sexual desire. Within older horror texts, a woman with an appetite for sex or anything related to sexuality is punished, usually with murder, for her immorality. Female appetite serves as an impetus for the women to deserve their coming punishment. Altogether, these tendencies send a very clear message to consumers of horror. Women with desire who satiate that desire will be punished and deserve that punishment. The death by sex and final girl tropes are also present in many staple texts of classic horror. Take the 1978 classic Halloween. The main character and subject of Michael Myers' stalking, Laurie, babysits while across the street, her friend Annie plans to hook up with her boyfriend. Despite the fact that Myers has been focused on Laurie up until this point, he chooses in this moment to strangle Annie in the backseat of her car. Laurie's other friend Linda has sex with her boyfriend. Immediately after they have sex, Myers stabs him and strangles her. When Laurie investigates, she's attacked by Myers, but while he has been efficient in his other murders, Laurie is somehow able to escape relatively unharmed. Laurie is the final girl. Her survival is directly linked to her lack of sexual activity, her purity, and therefore her supposed moral superiority. This pattern and the connection between sexual purity and survival is present in countless other classic horror films. Watch A Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you will see the presence of the death by sex trope, final girl trope, and the male gaze. The horror genre has consistently depicted sex, or any desire from a woman, as an act that will surely get you murdered, likely in a terrifying, brutal way, and the desire to have sex is represented as indicative of other impure traits. Women's sexual appetites should be treated with as much respect within pop culture as male sexual appetites. Women who consume horror texts want to view their desire as something other than a horrendous offense punishable by death. In many newer horror texts, women's sexuality is often tied with hunger, fulfillment, control, and other feelings in complex and gratifying ways. Within these horror texts, women's desires are still often turned into something horrible, but the narrative power of the desires that are wielded by the female characters has more nuanced meaning. Desire is not a vehicle through which a wicked woman reveals her polluted nature, but rather it has become a tool for the story to illustrate a legitimate point about the nature of women's realities. These texts have taken the simplistic function of women's appetites in classic texts and given it more meaning, more nuance, more time, and more care. With the rising number of filmmakers with consideration of their female audience's desires has come significant and varied evolutions in the function of female appetite in horror. One prevalent path this evolution has taken is within the cannibal coming-of-age films starring women trend, a group of films that have enjoyed rising popularity. In Ginger Snaps, 16-year-old Ginger's newfound appetite is for other people, and she becomes a werewolf. Within the film, Ginger's cannibalism is used to illustrate a girl's transition into womanhood and what that transition means in a patriarchal society. Her werewolfism is linked to her period. She gets her first period while walking through a playground at night with her sister. Quickly after Ginger realizes that her period has arrived, she is attacked by a werewolf. Her bodily changes and growing sexuality coincide to the minute with the beginning of her werewolfism. Ginger grows more aggressive and at the same time begins menstruating very heavily, and as her behavior escalates, her sister becomes increasingly concerned. Ginger's changes that stem from the attacks are initially perceived as just a part of growing up. Her aggression is excused as PMS, and she mistakes her growing hunger for humans as a newly developed sex drive. While before the attack, Ginger had no interest in boys, soon after the attack she has violent, unprotected sex with a classmate. Her feelings about her growing sexuality are confused. The lines separating her desire, her disgust, her fear, and her hunger are blurred. She is not sure what she wants or needs, she is only aware that she wants something desperately, and society has informed her that what she wants is probably sex. Towards the end of the film, Ginger finally realizes that she has gravely misunderstood her own hunger.
What happened? I get this ache, and I thought it was for sex, but it's to tear everything into fucking pieces.
Within this film, there is an intrinsic connection between the appetite for human flesh, the desire for sex, and the desire for autonomy. Ginger's werewolfism gives her power. Her appetite is presented as a tool of self-liberation. Ginger's appetite for human flesh is part of what separates her from her sister Bridget, but that is just one of the functions her appetite serves. Her appetite is connected to her menstruation to illustrate her complicated transition into adulthood. It is blended and confused with her desire for sex, and it gives her options and agency that she never before had. You may feel that conversations about women's anxiety surrounding appetite, both sexual and food-based, are a bit overdone. Cultural fears about hunger are trite. So why are these very fears also so compelling? Perhaps the fear has become notable for the very reason it is so tedious. The horror genre, rather than ignoring these mundane concerns, invites us to sit with this disgust, this anxiety, to acknowledge our appetite, to refuse to let us suppress it. Female anxieties about appetite remain unresolved, and so people will continue to think about it, depict it, and try to pick it apart. There is a horror to hunger itself, and it is a horror that permeates our lives in tiny, mundane ways. In the story 8 Bites from Her Body and Other Parties, Carmen Maria Machado plays on this very fear. The function of the female appetite is to be a source of fear, rather than representative of something else. The narrator envies her mother's restraint. She always ate 8 bites for a meal, nothing more. The narrator and her sisters weren't so lucky, and it isn't until they each get a dangerous surgery that they are able to slim down to the late mother's tiny size. Despite all her efforts prior to the surgery, the narrator is unable to deny her appetite. Her appetite is unending, a source of shame and sinister. The situations the narrator finds herself in at the beginning of the story may seem mundanely sad, but it is the very commonality of these feelings that make them so powerful. The narrator of 8 Bites believes a dangerous surgery will rid her of her threatening appetite. It both did and did not. It rid her of the ability to feed this appetite, but her appetite remains. It has taken a new form, a physical form separate from the narrator and autonomous. The physical manifestation of her appetite has a presence that is impossible to ignore. It is a fully fleshed out being haunting the narrator and her home. Although the ghoulish appearance is terrifying, it is also innocent. It never tries to harm the narrator and is even helpful at points. The appetite is blameless. The fear and negative emotions we associate with appetite are placed on it externally and have nothing to do with the inherent goodness or badness of appetite itself. It is an ever-present reminder of the part of herself that the narrator has chosen to surgically and permanently sever. She endures throughout the narrator's life, out of sight but still there. Her presence reminds the narrator of her needs and that we can never be fully removed from wanting. The function of female appetite in horror began as the manner in which women revealed their sinful desires and could then be punished for those same desires. Over time, the horror genre has drastically evolved, and as women are taken more seriously as producers and consumers of horror, the function of female appetite in horror has grown to have more nuanced meanings. Her Body and Other Parties and Ginger Snaps are only two examples of some of the ways in which the function of women's hunger has evolved throughout time in the horror genre. More complication and variety within the horror genre, as within any genre, will lead to the production of more interesting and compelling works that connect with a wider variety of people. I expect that the female appetite will continue to be explored within the horror genre for as long as we are told to rebel against our desires.